Hello. It is November 14th, 2024, and this is the devlog for Project Blue number 12. I said that in the wrong order, but you get the idea. Um, yeah, let's see. Last time had a really big update that covered a slew of features over the last couple, like maybe 2 months or so. But this is the start of actually maintaining the cadence that I spoke to, I think, at the end of that video, so. Things that I'll be covering, centered on two feature pieces. I'll just jump into a demo, I guess. I'm not going to do these in chronological order because it's pretty much unavoidable to see one of them once I start it. I'm actually going to turn the sound down so you can hear the game. Tease. Go.
Round one. Ready, fight!
Yep. So that is what it seems like. There's now a round sort of match system in place. There's no visual tracking of it, which is something I wanted to get to, but I just didn't quite find the time before it becoming time to do this video, so probably pick it up later when I go back around and maybe touch up more of the HUD elements to be less placeholdery. I don't know if I'll ever hit like a final, or I will be hitting a final HUD anytime soon, but currently it's a best of 3 setup. You saw the announcement for round 1 by yours truly, and so for the sake of demoing the rounds, the jab is super cracked on damage now, so 700 to hit, and this next one will end the round.
KO. Round two. Ready, fight!
Yep. So we have KO called out as soon as one of us drops to 0 health. We fade to black. We reset. The spawns are now standardized, so we're spawning in the middle of the 2 barriers for longest time. We're spawning not at 0-0, but like pretty close to, because the barrier, one of the outer barriers, is on 0-0, and it was just easy to do it back then when I was testing like the barrier collision. So that's interesting. 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 Okay. What is going on? I think I am queuing up multiple jumps. I'm like holding the jump button, but I'm like, well, that's a bug. Okay. Gotta love demos. So anyway, there's obviously some branching to determine whether or not we've hit the end of the match or if it's just the end of the round. So we're on round 2 because only I have 1 around. If I use the debug tool, which has also been cranked up in damage, we can see what happens when it's a tie.
KO. Final round. Ready, fight!
So we have, you know, different sound file, voice line, whatever, for when we're for each of the rounds. We do the reset just as normal, and if one of us wins,
KO. Player one wins.
my very enthusiastic victory line plays, and we do a little like swivel of the camera to give a more dynamic shot. It works just the same as you would expect
Round one. Fight!
when the player 2 wins, so I'll demo that real quick.
KO. Round two. Ready, fight! KO. Player two wins.
Yeah. Don't see a future career in voice acting, but it's good enough for sure. So yeah, just to jump into the logic of what's actually happening here. You'll see it in this feature, as well as in the second one that I'll talk about later in this video. But I've been doing some work with setting up event bindings with like running delegates from the C++ class that all of the, well, I'd say all of, but the single fighter character Manny is inheriting from. So I am setting up the event binding here in the game mode at during its event play, begin play event. So I feel like I touched on this a long time ago in another video where it's kind of just like spawning the players in and hooking them up with their respective controller. We spawn the HUD. What's the other thing? Oh yeah, spawn the camera and make sure they have a reference to one another. So that also happens. Now we have an event binding that's also happening. And this stuff down here is the initial round start stuff. So like when we first boot it up, it's a black screen that then fades in,
Round one.
or fades out of the black screen, whatever. And then we have that stuff. That's all being handled here. Currently it's mostly just a bunch of delays to get the timing the way I want it. There's some hard set text being placed into the fighting canvas. I can look at that real quick. This also has a lot of the second feature, so which is all this stuff over here, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But main thing for the round start stuff is the match state, which is just a text box that's in the middle that I'm filling in and then clearing with text for the announcements. And there's a fade screen right here, which I have hidden, but by default it's a black screen. So, yeah, those are the two elements that really matter here. Inside the actual canvas, there's a couple of animations that I made for this. There's fade to black, which is not going to show anything if I have the fade screen obscured, but it starts with a transparent fade screen and, you know, shifts to black as you'd expect. I just play this animation in reverse if I want to go the other way. There is a couple, I think one of these isn't being used, but Pop Intensify is not going to show anything unless I put text in here. So for the sample, text, test. So if I play it, you know, this is what the KO screen is. It's got a little bit of a shrink, or not shrink, expand going on. It's like hard to even, I have to zoom in, I think, to see it. Actually, I don't know how you scroll smaller increments, but I mean, you can tell what's happening when I just play it. If I do playback speed, it's more obvious that it's like squished and then expanding very rapidly. And there's like a frame where you can see it. I'm not sure what that is actually. Oh. Let's go slower. What are these? Visible? Hidden. Oh yeah, okay, let's get rid of this. I was originally, so when I first set this up, I wasn't actually manually changing the text. I just had the word KO living in here at all times, and so in order to not have KO printed to the screen initially, I was hiding it and then using the animation to make it unhidden, but that's a lot less manageable, so oh yeah, why is this like... This is so weird. The timeline's like reaching further back than 0, 0. Okay. Yeah, I never noticed that at runtime. I guess it's like such a quick little pulse that it's hard to even tell, but yeah, this looks better. Or well, it looks fine still. That's what I mean. I didn't notice. So yeah, that's what the KO screen is. This intensify, they all gonna be slow. How does that even work? Okay. Yeah, so I forget which one of these I'm using. It's probably the small one. But this is what's used when the fight comes. So I think this one's not being used. Sorry, rambling. Yeah, made a few of these basically. Could see adjusting them. I could see doing something fancier, but without like my own, text to even make it feel like it fits into whatever the tone is of this game that it ends up being. Like I didn't feel like it was worth putting too much effort into it. I just wanted to demonstrate some of the sensation of it being like a proper fighting game, having it shake a little bit. I think adds an element of intensity that is kind of nice. That covers the animations and the text, yeah. There's just like a bunch of like little helper macros and functions happening here. Declare Victor is broken up into a couple of camera tricks, where first I have changed camera style, which could be more descriptive, but I kept it kind of vague for now because I know I'll want to incorporate a similar style of camera adjustment when I'm doing supers or maybe certain specials or grapples or whatever. So I've kept it kind of vague for now, but basically changed camera style. Excuse me. This is the function that disables the behavior where the camera is like following the midpoint between our characters. So this is you could call this one type of behavior, and I'm not gonna do it all again, but like when the game ends and the camera like snapped to like the 45-degree angle and looked at the player, that's the other camera style. So let's see. So yeah, there's that, and then yeah, display vector is the camera trick. Excuse me. We have a timeline to kind of get the right curves we want. There's actually two floats that we're setting up in this timeline to be used as a lerp for the camera adjustments. One that's a little bit more like a traditional just curve. I don't know. I think there's a word for this, like this S curve that gets used in everything, where it starts slow, accelerates, and then decelerates. There's a much sharper one that actually dips for the zoom function. Gives it a little bit more of like a punch. That's just how these two are used. So move the camera forward. Like it's just like a flat number in front of the player character. Where's it at? Target is facing right. Multiply by 500. So it's 500 units in front of the player character. Then we rotate to face them. So find look at rotation between the actor of self, so the camera, and the actor of the victorious character. Snap it, the lerp. And because it's an orthogonal camera, we're using, I guess, not like a true zoom piece, or maybe, I don't know. I'm assuming if you're using a regular camera view, a perspective camera, it would be called zoom, but in this case it's the orthogonal width. So we're effectively narrowing the field of view for the camera. Does this even need to? No. Self-explanatory now. So yeah, that's all this is. Kind of proud of how that actually turned out. Do it again real quick because I want to look at it one more time. I need to get rid of that test. I think camera work is really interesting. I need to figure out a workflow for how I can make sure the camera flow is what I want for a particular animation. This was kind of easy, right? Because the character's just standing there. Like the fight's over and it's going to kind of just snap to a shot that kind of catches the player character's profile. So I didn't need to like map it to any particular motion, but like let's say I wanted to get a good camera angle for when I do the grab animation. And I want it to be like a fluid thing. Like I don't want to just zoom in and tilt and then the entire grapple is then viewed from that side. Let's say I wanted to make it cinematic, like it's moving with, I don't know, like my head or something. So it like yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting to think about. Not sure how I'll do that when I get to that point. I guess level sequences already have or can have a concept of the camera being part of the level sequence. There'll probably be something where I have to do a hard cut. Instead of just moving the existing game camera, I'll probably end up doing something like a new camera is spawned in and we actually change the viewport to be using that one. That's probably how it's done actually, yeah. Okay. So that's thinking way ahead though, not there yet. Yeah, okay. That more or less covers the round-based stuff. You know, first to two, best of three, however you want to phrase it. Not too much there beyond what you've seen. Okay, so the other thing is an input display, and if you were looking at the left half of the screen at all, you've already seen it, and it's the thing I was kind of alluding to here in the canvas, but there are now a bunch of widgets that make up this like piece over here. So I'm gonna open those and then I'll demo it quick. Okay. So
Round one. Ready, fight!
right. So if you're familiar with like training modes in fighting games, oftentimes they have a feature where you can toggle, which there's no toggle for this, but you can toggle the ability to see what inputs are being done. The number that's on the far left is just a timer, although it's not the seconds, it's sort of just the arbitrary game time, like event ticking, but you're seeing what I'm pressing in real time, so, or not pressing. In the case of the N stands for neutral. I'm not putting any inputs. If I hold forward, you can see that the number counts up until I release it and do a new input. If I hold like combinational buttons, it also shows that. There are inputs for punch, kick, and special. Special is or unique, whatever wording I want to use for it. Right now it's represented with the kunai. I just grabbed these all off of I think the site's called Favicon. These are icons that I cannot use if I ever wanted to go commercial with this game, but they are the current placeholders, so I don't think there's any problem with using. You know, we got up inputs, and you can see that like I can like move them, but like it's not necessarily affecting my player character. That's still driven by the actual state machine. But you can tell like you can start to see now if I wanted to have special inputs in the game, we're like one step closer to being able to represent that. This is also using a delicate system where everything is being broadcast by the player character. Yeah, I've got a second event graph now for just inputs. I felt like that was a good way to sort this stuff because it's kind of like conditional state handling stuff, handle grappling, handle being grappled, push box, pushing. This could maybe be its own category like collisions, handle being hit. So yeah, inputs now. There's a whole bunch of booleans for all of the inputs. We've got punch, kick, and special. Light and heavy variations for the punches and kicks, and special 1, special 2. Currently, those distinctions between like light and heavy or 1 and 2 don't show up in the input reader, but you know the concept is there for whenever I want to fill those in. Maybe when I get different icons or custom icons or whatever. So, let's see. These were added as like my testing for this feature, but they don't need to exist anymore. And then obviously the directional ones are up here. I think I had most of these directionals for some reason or another, except for up. I think down had to exist when I was like messing with the like crouch state, and holding left and right was relevant when I needed blocking. So thankfully those ones sort of already, like the necessity of knowing these values kind of led me down this path, which I think made solving for this problem, this input reader feature, a little bit easier. But anyway. when the input is, triggered, we still do the input, like the apply movement input, which is what it was doing before. But now we've also are tracking when it starts or completes and update the Boolean accordingly. And so whenever that happens, we evaluate input change, and this is where we hit the delegate. Determine movement net input. This is saying, if you're holding a bunch of keys, let's say I'm holding left and right, holding right and I'm holding left, it actually comes up neutral. That is how it functions in Street Fighter. I'm still holding both keys, but it equates to neutral. And that's kind of valuable because it's actually something I never thought about. How does Street Fighter, how does blocking work in a lot of fighting games? It's usually by holding the opposite direction. What's stopping you from holding left and right? And how you're blocking both directions? Obviously, you don't want that because that defeats the whole purpose of like a cross up, which is where you like switch sides on your opponent to hit them on the left or right side before they block it. So having that equate to being neutral is I think a wise idea. So that's how it represents, and then I can like add the down input, and the left and the right are still being held down, and they still cancel out, but down is being recognized. If I hold up, then we're neutral again. Although interesting, we actually stay in the crouch state. I didn't think about that. Interesting. I think that needs to be examined. It should probably result in you being in a standing state. And so similarly, I'm holding up and down because I held up first. I'm spamming the up input per the state machine, but not per the input reader. So that's something that will need to be examined. It's not an immediate item on my roadmap, but I've already determined that I need to at some point make like a proper input reader, something that will likely also respond to these delegate calls. And that's like when input reading, input buffering, special inputs like quarter circle stuff, that's when stuff will come into play, and I think that'll be a good time to also address this weirdness. But anyway, yeah, very proud of how this turned out. I remember it being a little convoluted to get here though. So I opened them all up just preemptively, but the way this is kind of set up, there's a display, which is the entire grid of data. There's a container, which is the combination of a singular timer, a singular movement input, and a singular attack input or something. I forget what I called it. Action input. All three of those go into the input container one by one. I know in the future I'll want to expand this so that there can be multiple action inputs, because in a lot of fighting games you have inputs that are done, like certain moves that are done by combinations of action inputs. So in Street Fighter, I believe it's light punch and light kick will give you a grab. It's not just a singular button like it is in my game currently. So in the future, TBD. And then there's the icon. So the icon is just a shell. I don't think there's any logic in here. It just has a size box to, set up the image to be the image of the size that I want it, and then the actual image, which the parent, or not the parent, but the other widgets on the higher up on the hierarchy will just set. So for all intents and purposes, you can forget about the input icon. It's just a filler, like a container. That's confusing because this is called a container. Yeah. So the logic here was quite tricky because I ran into a dilemma where my first reaction was I will have this grid, this array of input containers, and I will just insert one and delete the other one. But what I found is Unreal doesn't let you outright delete widgets. I could remove it from the display, and so only 10 would be present. But if I did like a print statement to see how many of object class widget existed, or my particular widget, I would see that I'm actually just like flooding the memory with all those widgets. And I tried doing some research into this about like manually doing garbage collection to stop that. The commands I was looking up weren't working for me though, so I took another route where there are now a predefined set of 10 containers that just always exist. And what's happening is we are storing an array in the input display in the like the highest order of this input component. We're storing an array that has the integer timer value as well as the move input and the action input. So yeah. Yeah, okay. And so there was and so the next tricky part about this was because everything exists in an array, something like the input timer, which is updating in real time when you're in the first, like if you look at the input display here, there's, I'm going to spam the controls for a second. Like the bottom 9 things are snapshots, right? Like 4, 11, 8, 2, I'm just going up the list from the bottom. Those are all kind of saved at the point when the input chime changes. Only the top one is actually being updated in real time until it hits max timer, which I've left as 99, which is akin to Street Fighter, but there's no reason it couldn't go higher. The tricky thing about this is when you're working with arrays, you are just pulling out copies. You're not pulling out the actual reference. So updating the integer. Okay, so I guess I need to close the thought on like how this array is working. Whenever a new input is triggered, let's see. Add input icons. I need to kind of like review the order of operations. So we do the binding here when the input display is first created, and we're bound to this event now, which is what we were calling back on Manny. We said receive input, or broadcast input, and that just comes into here. Go. Okay, so then we break apart the input. This is no, JK. This is for printing. Don't need to do this. I should actually. We can just delete this now. So we feed in the full input, which is the 3 things I listed before. I think it's the 3 things. Double check, actually. I can't remember if I actually store the integer in here. No, I don't. Okay. Yeah, so configure input display data. This is where we do a mapping. That's right. Sorry, it's been like a week or 2 since I worked on this. It's weird to think about again. So the reason I did it this way, or what I'm doing here is, actually, let's see if I can find the logic where I actually set it up, because I think determine, yeah, okay. So this is gonna look a little unintuitive, but what I'm doing is based off of the input of the vertical direction as well as the horizontal direction, I'm adding up an integer, and that integer then goes into the mapping to calculate to like what you think of, like, it's not cardinal directions, but also with the diagonals. So I'm actually just gonna open up Paint because it's a little bit weird to think about. But I thought about this, like, what's a logical way to map what is effectively 4 keys to 8 directions plus 9 if you're counting neutral. And what I came up with is like a grid system. So if I draw it like this, you have buttons, right? You have let's get a thicker line. How do I do that? Shouldn't there be like a thickness thing? Okay. That's the paint tool? And what did you do to my paint, Microsoft? Oh, brushes. There we go. Brush. Okay, so we have left, right, up, down. What this function is doing is it's looking at each of these in the context of horizontal and vertical, as I said. So it's n. So I don't remember exactly how I mapped it off the top of my head. I guess I could just look over here. Holding up. If we're holding up, let's see if we're holding up or down. Okay, yeah, okay. So first, holding up or holding down. If that exclusively holding up or down. So in other words, we're saying if we're holding just up or just down, if we're not, actually, okay, sorry. I should have gathered my thoughts before doing this, but it's okay. The way this is mapped is if we are either holding neutral via holding neither or by holding both, then we don't want to add any value. And when I say value, I just mean to say we're using an integer to kind of track the sum total. So I'm going to use reds for the verticals. So this equates to 0. And based on what I have here, if we're holding up and that's false, that's 10. So we'll add 10. And if we're holding up, that's 20. Next, it's going to be the same idea, but it's in the horizontal direction now. So we do an XOR check again. If we're in the neutral state, whether it means holding neither left or right or holding both, we get a 0. And in this case, we're just adding 1 if we're holding left, and we add 2 if we're holding right. So now what you can do is with any given input combination, you can sum up these values, and based on the integer, you know exactly which direction is being held. So let's say I'm holding up and right. What that means is when we add the numbers together, I'm going to use a different color, we end up with 22. If we're holding, down and left, then we end up with 11. If we're holding just right and not up or down, then 2, the number that we were calculating, is it as well. So you can see how we've now resolved what was initially 4 booleans with like the nullification of 2 pairs equating to deactivating a boolean, or both booleans, I guess. We've now solidified that into just an integer. So I'm just gonna fill out the rest of these. This is 21. This is 1. This is also 0. 10. 20. And 12. So there you have it. All of our numbers that could potentially come out of the system are in the green. We have 0, 1, 2, 10, 11, 12, 20, 21, 22. And based on that, we can always say what input is being held. And so that's what's going on here. We're condensing those booleans all into an integer, and we are then going into the mapping to find it. And so I think I actually have a reverse of this map on the input display, which is what we were looking at a second ago. But let's see. So maybe that's an argument for it should not exist. Maybe I should just keep it as an integer, but I think this makes it more legible. So you can see now we have 0, 1, 2, 10, 11, 12, 20, 21, 22. And those just map to any num value of up, left, up, right, etc. So that gets encapsulated here when we're determining the movement input. And then that gets fed into the full input, which is a new struct that I made that has the movement and the action input, and that gets broadcast. Real quick, I want to check this again. Yeah, so this is, I mentioned before, there's no distinction between light punch and heavy punch, for instance, or kick and heavy kick, or special 1, special 2. It's also just a very rudimentary, what's the word I'm looking for? Rudimentary, like, hierarchy as far as which button is red. If I'm holding multiple inputs, it's only going to register the highest prio. So right now, punch, if I get my cursor back, punch gets checked first, then kick gets checked first, then special. So if I hold punch, kick, special, it's only ever going to show punch. And then if I do it in the other order, special, kick, punch, you can see like it's just kind of a short circuit solution. I didn't want to give too much effort into this because I knew down the line I would have to do what I'd mentioned before, where in theory you should be able to see multiple punches or kicks or specials because those could be different inputs. But so it's kind of a stub right now. Yep, that gets broadcast. Come back to display. We take that broadcast, we break it apart. Movement input and action input go into these mappings. These mappings are, oh that's right, this mapping isn't for dispelling or breaking apart, going back into integers, although it arguably still could for the movement input, but I just think this is more readable. It's feeding it into the icons, and so icons, you can't see them in that preview because it's black, the high alpha value, but you know, this is what the up input is, and so they're all just like that. We find that, we feed that into a different struct, which is the input display data, not the full input. That's where the timer comes into play. We're always inserting into the 0th place of the array. So I mentioned before, there's like an array and just 10 containers. We're always just adding something to the 0th index, and that's just pushing the rest of the array down until you have stuff that's just not, you know, represented in a display. I want to say I have it clearing out stuff beyond the 10th element, but I don't know. I don't know what this is either. And yeah, and here's my reminder to myself to update the logic for multiple action inputs, but nah, nah for right now. So yeah, this gets added into the array, and then we iterate through the array. Stop current input timer. Oh yeah, so when we create that container, we add let's go back. Okay, it was add I could probably name these better because I'm having a hard time orienting myself here, but configure, is this what I want? Yeah, so when I add, so we're taking it, we're adding into this array, we're taking the display data that we like pass in from Manny, but there's also these two other values. There's an input timer, which are just starting at 0, or starting at 1, excuse me, and a boolean. So this boolean is what tells the container whether or not the timer should keep ticking in real time. Timer enabled. Event tick, timer enabled. If true, then we increment the timer. Once we get to 0 or more, then we disable the timer and we set it to 99. We also disable the timer once we add a new element in to the array. It pushes this one down, but it doesn't happen here. It happens display, if I'm not mistaken. Configure input. So configure input display data, and then we iterate through these. Stop current input timer. That's where it is. Yeah, okay, that's right. So we're overwriting the array element and the 0th place just to update the input timer from, because so when we added in the initial time, oh man, this is so complicated. I can't believe how hard this is to explain. Oh, whoops. I just deleted it. Close something. So when we add it in here, we're manually setting it to 1, and we're setting the timer enabled to checkmarked, right? The issue though is this is just an array, right? If I were to, even if the timer is counting up and the input timer's logic, or input container's logic, excuse me, once I then push the array down to update all of the cascading flow of input containers, this value wouldn't be, the input timer wouldn't be preserved by default. We have to then actually update the value in the array. So that's what's going on here. When we stop the timer, we grab the value out of the input container. This is the value, or this is the value, I guess, but this is the container for the value that is actually updating in real time. We're taking that and then we're updating the array element, so now it's there. We don't have to worry about that past the first one, because once they've been pushed down in the stack, it's not moving anymore. So that's why we also set timer enabled to unchecked. I think that covers the gist of it. I mean, and then so yeah, that's that we just iterate through set input display data. This is, oh yeah, this is a, what did I? God. That calls this event. Okay, yeah. I just didn't want it to be. I think I remember now. It was put display data struct target get child at. Oh yeah, because I'm fishing the child out of the vertical box. Unreal, the blueprint at this point does not inherently know what type of widget it is, so I used a interface in order to just have a reference to that call. I don't have to cast it for this operation, which is something I'm trying to stray away from. I think I still have a handful of casts in the blueprint, particularly around when working with Manny versus the fighter character. But from what I've been reading, that's a pretty expensive call to be making, and so I didn't. This example where I'm like constantly updating inputs, I wanted to try and do that without casting, so there's now an interface that's being used here. But yep, that kicks it off over to here, and from here it's like, you know, pretty straightforward. We're taking the movement icon that was already stored, setting the texture, you know, updating the values, checking or changing timer enabled to whatever we pass in, which is only really relevant on that first time we move it from the active to the other 9 containers. Yeah, so that more or less covers it.
Round 1. Ready, fight!
Yeah, super happy with how this turned out. I thought the input display would be a pretty big headache, and while I think it had a lot of unintuitive steps, it was not nearly as bad as I feared. And I think the round start end is really cool because now there's an end state. It's like an actual video game. Someone can win, someone can lose. It's great. And yeah, I think in the next devlog, I'm looking at doing stuff that is a little more in the game space again. I want to implement aerial move, which I think will be useful because it'll let me work around the idea of like what happens when you, or like how do I implement an attack where doing the attack kind of changes your trajectory a little bit. You know, in some games you do like you jump and you do an aerial, and the aerial might actually lift you off the ground, kind of stalling a little bit. There's some stuff in place that'll help with that, but I think I'll also need to address how gravity functions in my game. So that'll be an interesting thing to look at. I've also been wanting to do like hit particles and hit sound effects. I got some exposure to sound effects by doing the announcer. And it's, pretty not too bad to work with, although damn do I hate voice acting. So there'll be that to look forward to. Hit particles I think will be great. I think like there's a real lack of substance to the contact in this game currently. Punches feel like nothing. I'd love to have sparks and such fly off. So that's what I would say look forward to. as always, thank you for watching. I appreciate the eyes. I appreciate the views. It's just been a lot of fun. So take care.